Welcome everybody. This is our last seminar this semester. So last but not least, and I would like to welcome a PhD student from Paris, Chloé Sénécat. We'll be happy to hear from you, Chloé, on the EU urban development policies. Your presentation will be on a redefinition of the governance cities based on the examples of Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw. This sounds very interesting. So we hope to have an interesting presentation and discussion after that. To remind everybody the rules, we'll have up to 45 minutes of the presentation itself, and then we'll collect questions from the audience here and online. We ask our guests to write down the questions and then answer them collectively. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. So good morning. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the presentation. And today I will present you this topic, so the European Union and urban development policies, a redefinition of the governance of cities, the examples of Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw. And to introduce this presentation, I would like to start with a quote from a movie that I really like, which is The Rounders. And this movie is about poker. The main character in this movie is going to play poker in a casino with some friends. They are all professional players and they are playing against amateurs to win money. And he says, we're not playing together, but then again, we're not playing against each other either. It's like the nature channel. You don't see piranhas eating each other, do you? And this quote, this illustrates the functioning of the European urban dimension and the functioning of the multi-level governance that I will talk about today. And I will try to show you why. So first, urban development became a European issue at the end of the 1980s. With the development of regional representations in Brussels. And in the long term, it led to concrete commitments from the European institutions and the member states. For example, you have here the adoption of the Leipzig Charter in 2007, a document which was renewed in 2020, and which is the basis for a European urban dimension, and it proves the commitment of the member state in this direction. But there is a paradox from the beginning. From the beginning, these urban development policies at the European level face a major issue. European Union is not a state, and even though there is a supranational character, urban development is not one of its competences. So theoretically, the European Union cannot be involved in urban development. To understand the development of these urban policies, we often study this policy through the lens of political science. But unlike any other European policy, the urban dimension of cohesion policy is a territorialized one. The territory is at the center of the elaboration of this policy. So that is why we need a geographical approach to understand it. And it is this approach that this presentation aims to explain. So here are the research questions that we will discuss today. So how can a geographical approach lead to analyze this paradoxical European policy and its impact on the implementation of multi-level governance? To what extent is the urban dimension of the EU policy leading to redefinition of governance methods within European cities? And as a result of the EU's involvement in this area, and despite its lack of competence, what are the stakeholders, in European urban development now playing together and not against each other in multi-level governance? So this presentation is based on an ongoing research, my PhD thesis. In this research, I compared 3 cities, Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw, and I am currently doing this field research. So I will base the answers of this question on examples of this field research. First, I would like to come back briefly on the framework of this urban dimension. The urban dimension of cohesion policy is based on the principle of subsidiarity. According to the Treaty on the European Union, it is defined in areas which do not fall within its explicit competence, the Union shall act only if and insofar as the objectives of the proposed action cannot be sufficiently achieved by the member states, but can rather be better achieved at the EU level. That is why there is no urban policy as such at the European level. We talk about an urban dimension to cohesion policy. And this principle of subsidiarity can be a limit to the EU competence in this field. And this is a limit that the EU institutions have to overcome if they want to be involved in an urban multi-level governance. But actually, this principle of subsidiarity also means that there is a new balance of powers between the different stakeholders in urban development. Jan Beck summarizes it. He's saying that that the most appropriate level of governance changes regarding the issues concerned. So sometimes it can be national, but sometimes it can also be European. In fact, all the levels of governance have a role to play. This is illustrated by the URBACT program. So you maybe know this program. URBACT is a program, a European program for the exchange of experiences between European cities. This program is co-financed by the European Commission and by the member states. In order to adapt the solutions, the exchange of experiences, the experiences to the local situations, each participating city has to implement, to create a local action group with city representatives, elected representatives, citizens representative associations, etc. So we see here that the national level, the European one, and the local level share the competencies here. The slide is about the actors involved in this multi-level urban governance. You probably know it. It's just to, you probably know them, but it's just to show you that today we will focus on the European Commission, because this is the European Commission is the keystone of the urban dimension, representing the executive power at the European level. So it is the Commission that makes proposal on regional policy in general. And in this European Commission, you have the DG Regio, which is responsible for projects relating to European cohesion and the management of programs financed by the ERDF, so the European Regional Development Fund, and the Cohesion Funds. Just to precise that these two funds are managed by the Commission, but also by the member states in their implementation. So we have an interdependence of all these stakeholders in the multi-level governance. That's what we will see. But they will mainly focus on this European institution at the European level. And to end this framework, just to show you that how is the European Commission implementing this urban dimension? You have first the general framework for intervention with the structural and investment funds. The ERDF is the most mobilized in the urban dimension of cohesion policy, because 8% of this fund has to be dedicated to sustainable urban development. And you have the European territorial cooperation, which is an objective of cohesion policy. And you have under this European territorial cooperation some programs. We talked already about URBACT, and I will give these examples a few times during the presentation. So now that we explained briefly the framework of this urban dimension, how can we analyze it? As I said in the introduction, the concepts used the concepts mobilized in this urban dimension are often seen through the lens of political science. And of course, we require the input of political science in order to understand their definitions and their issue. But unlike any other European policy, here it is a territory that is at the heart of its development and implementation. So therefore, it seems inevitable to take an interest in what geography can produce in terms of analyzing this object of study. That is why there are two components in my approach of European urban dimension. The first one is an approach based on the instruments. This comes from the political science. Lacombe and Le Gallès think of public policy in terms of instruments, which are, according to them, generic technical tools that convey a concrete conception of the political-society relationship and are supported by a conception of regulation. This is exactly the approach of the Commission of the topic, because as I said, the European Commission cannot implement binding means for the cities for that development. So they try to influence the actors in the way they elaborate the policy, and they do it with some instruments. So in the context of urban development, this approach makes it possible to characterize European involvement in urban areas by analyzing the means of actions deployed by the EU. But this approach is completed by political geography. The urban dimension, in order to integrate these areas into its policies, it cannot create a public policy for urban development. The Commission places the territory at the center of the fields of action for which it is responsible. So the urban dimension is integrated into the cohesion policy, implemented on the basis of a shared competence between the Commission and the member states. According to Anna Gebert and Claude Afatichetti, the urban strength and the ITIs, integrated territorial investment, it is a tool that we will talk about today also, represent the most territorialized action. They relate to predefined areas where the actors elaborate and implement a development strategy. We see it in the main documents for the European urban dimension. For example, the new Leipzig Charter and the Territorial Agenda 2030 adopt the territorialized approach as one of the central principles of the European urban dimension. In the new Leipzig Charter, we have a tailor-made approach, which is the place-based approach, which is encouraged. So it is the territory that must be at the center of the functioning of the instruments and funds for urban development. This logic of territorialization of European policy makes a geographical approach to the urban dimension of cohesion policy essential. This is why we have chosen to place this study within the field of political geography. We are interested here in the relation between levels of governance and part of their territory, and in the consequences of this relation on methods of governance. Following on from the vision of Emmanuelle Boulineau, I quote her, the entry point of cooperation between cities makes it possible to re-examine the dominant notions in political geography of territorial functioning, such as governance and decentralization. So the aim here is not just to look at the changes in policies brought by the involvement of the Commission into a field of action that is not its own, but also to consider the implication of this phenomenon for urban areas and the interactions between the reconfiguration of governance methods and the recomposition of territorialities through the creation of a new European instrument with the aim of sustainable urban development. Cities seem to be strategic areas for the European, which is why institutions are developing these instruments. And in return, cities are seizing European opportunities, feeding a process of Europeanization. Europeanization is a process of construction, dissemination, and institutionalization of formal and informal rules, procedures, policy paradigms, styles, ways of doing things, as well as shared norms and beliefs, according to Radhaïd. We assume that this can be observed not only in the policies, but also in the territory. The new Leipzig Charter endorses the urban functional area as one of the three scales to think urban development. And we see here, for example, in Warsaw, that the integrated territorial investments participate to create this urban functional area. So integrated territorial investment, ITI, is a European tool to create a territorial strategy and to combine EU funds to implement it. And it is implemented in Warsaw. And as you see, we can map it. So we can map the European impact on the Warsaw territory. And it is not only policies that are becoming Europeanized, but also the territories themselves. So then there is a need to study urban development, the urban dimension of cohesion policy through the lens of geography. This geographical approach to European policy that at first sight appears paradoxical allows us to re-examine concepts such as multi-level governance and to consider the relationships between actors through the lens of an interplay between scales, which contributes to a territorial reconfiguration of urban areas. This research studies the different actors involved in urban governance from a multi-level perspective. So here are a few definitions about governance. According to Olivier Pey, the term has been revived to refer to the art or the way of governing. So it distinguishes itself from the institution of the government, and it includes the dimension of the civil society participation in the management of public affairs. So governance as a way of governing includes participation of a diversity of more or less institutionalized players in the development and implementation of public policies. So in line with Emmanuel Boulino's approach that we cited before, we are now revisiting the concept of multi-level governance applied to territories through the urban dimension of cohesion policy. In theory, multi-level governance is being established and the European Commission is becoming a stakeholder in urban dimension, but that is what we want to question with this approach. The political geography approach enables us to study this multi-level governance from the perspective of the interplay of scales between stakeholders. By adding an urban dimension to their cohesion policy, the European institutions are taking increasingly into account the local level. And this dynamic is in line with the theory of localization. So according to Swinjedu, this is a combined process of globalization and local territorial reconfiguration. So the national level, which was before the reference, is being restructured, facing the development of the European level and the local one. For Patrick Le Gallès, we are indeed witnessing an historical interlude of confusion and interdependence of powers favorable to the autonomy of city, the scope of which remains to be defined. And Sylvain Kahn notices that while European integration does not put an end to nation states, its centrality is being called into question in the process of European integration, as the member states have agreed to share a part of their sovereignty. So this is leading to a change in the balance of power between the actors involved at the different levels, leaving more room for local players to assert themselves. And the European urban dimension, by influencing a specific public policy, would then be part of a more global dynamic of transforming the way in which territories are governed. Cities are given a new centrality in that the municipalities and their administration become key players in the development of territorial public policies. They are now interlocutors for the European institution, which approach them directly through the programs designed for them. And here you see this this picture here. It is the URBACT methods. So the URBACT, the program we talked about before for the exchange of experience, you see that you have the decision makers at the top, but the goal is to approach directly the citizens in the urban areas. And actually, I did for my field research some interviews in the three cities I compare, Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw. And I did an interview in a French ministry with a person who is working for the implementation for this urban dimension. And this person told me that the national level in France had to take a backseat in this European urban dimension in its implementation, as the management of the funds, for example, are mainly the responsibility of the regions and of the local level. So we see here that there is a new balance and that the European Union is becoming a new actor in this multi-level governance. However, this process of reconfiguration of urban governance and even territoriality as a result of European integration and the transformation of the state needs to be questioned. this process should be seen in the context of the rescaling theory developed by Neil Brenner. According to Brenner, the state does not disappear, but it adapts to an ongoing process within a rationale of economic competitiveness. So according to him, the state uses this interplay of scales to its advantage and to reaffirms its presence in the governance. So from the point of view of reinterpreting the notion of multi-level governance, this debate between the reaffirmation, transformation, or disappearance of the state is central. Re-examining it through the lens of urban dimension of European policy seems to be an interesting entry point in that this competence remains national, but it is gradually being shared as a compromise with the European Commission. Contrary to Sylvain Cahn's assertion that we talked about before, in the urban field, the sovereignty of the states is not shared. It is therefore a compromise that does not prevent tensions between the stakeholders, and these tensions fuel the debate on the role assigned to each level of governance. Gilles Pinson says that Neil Brenner's approach makes this tension invisible because he concludes that all the components of the new governance agree on the same vision of territorial dynamics. However, this leads that leads to a denial also of the autonomy of each actor, who may act according to their own logic and competing interests. So here, Gilles Pinson takes the example of the Brexit. During the Brexit, the UK and the European Union have in fact advocated different approaches to what the state should be. So understanding this interplay of scale within the European urban dimension should also help to reveal these tensions and different visions in this area and question the multi-level governance. And here we can find already some examples. For the 2021-2027 programming period, the European Commission has established a European Urban Initiative. This European Urban Initiative at first was a one-stop shop to combine, to bring together all the programs and funds for the cities, for urban areas at the European level. And URBACT should have been in this European Urban Initiative. But as I told you, there is a shared management in URBACT, and the member states are co-funding it, and they are sitting in a monitoring committee which define the program strategy, and the member states refuse to integrate URBACT in this European Urban Initiative to keep the control over this program. So it gives this organization between the EUI and URBACT, a complicated organization, and this is the result of tension of different visions of urban development in the multi-level governance. Closer to us today, we can think of the tensions between the national level and the local level in Poland, which also show different vision of territorial development. So the stakeholders in European urban governance at different level have in this case acted according to independent and opposing logics within the framework of multi-level governance. Moreover, the actors involved in this multi-level governance in the urban field have to do with pre-existing national structures. In a common system such as the one of the EU, the urban dimension is taken into account differently in national policies, and the Commission is more or less easily integrated into a multi-level governance depending on the national structures. And here, the comparison between Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw showed these differences. The example of Berlin is meaningful here. Germany is a federal state, so the principle of subsidiarity is already implemented in the national system internally. And this is reflected in the implementation on the European urban dimension locally. Each Berlin district has a person responsible for the implementation of European funds and projects, so at the local level, the district level. In Paris, this role does not exist. And in Warsaw, it depends on the political will. So sometimes it exists, but it's because politically we decided to create this position. So multi-level governance means here that we can have a direct impact on the area. And you see here a flyer that was created by this European managers at the district level, and which says European district, your shortest connection to Brussels. Sorry. And I talked about the new Leipzig Charter, which is the basis for this programming period for the urban dimension. And you see that you have these components, the integrated approach, participation and co-creation, multi-level governance. So this implementation of the principle of subsidiarity. And this document was drafted by the German presidency of the council. So you see here also a will to disseminate this multi-level governance and this approach, this model of governance to European cities. So as this governance evolves, it is possible for the Commission to become involved in the urban development of its cities by overcoming its lack of competence in the field of urban development. And here, comparing projects implemented in the 3 case studies helps to have an overview of the different instruments available at the EU level and to understand their impact on the governance. So first, how can we explain the involvement of the European Commission? According to Jean-Claude Tunic, public policy is defined by the interventions of an authority invested with public power and governmental legitimacy on a specific area of society or territory. So until now, public policy has required a legitimate authority to act in a field. But we have said it many times now, the EU doesn't have this legitimacy. So it would therefore have no legitimacy to act directly in the urban areas. This is why we need to adopt a different analytical approach to understand the European approach to this field of action. And this is the public action. For Patrick Lacombe and Le Gallès, according to them, public action is characterized by do-it-yourself, the intertwining of network, a multiplication of stakeholders, multiple aims, heterogeneity, the cross-cutting nature of problems, and changes in the scale of reference territory. So even if the state remains competent, it is not the only one to it's no longer the only one to intervene. And this leads to a change in its role and in public policies themselves. Compared to public policy, public action is characterized by a diversity of actors and actions for which institutionalization is not a condition anymore. And this matches the European, the positioning of the European institutions. They are part of a network of players and act using new instruments, thanks to cohesion policy, without having any institutionalized formal competence to get involved in urban dimension. And here we have the example of the Oasis courtyard in Paris, and it illustrates this principle of public action. The Oasis courtyard in Paris was a project co-financed, so 80% was financed by the European Union, by the program Urban Innovative Action, to rebuild courtyards, school courtyards, mainly for ecological reasons. And multi-level governance was one of the key principles of this project. It was implemented with an expert from the European program, but also with the school parents, with the pupils themselves, because they did participative workshops to work together. So it illustrates this principle of public action and the principle of integrated approach, the vertical integrated approach, because we see that all the levels of governance are taken into account and that all the stakeholders are working together. This rationale for public action has given rise to a laboratory. The urban dimension of EU cohesion policy is seen as a laboratory. because it was unable to implement a public policy in the traditional sense, the Commission is developing a particular approach to engage in the field of urban development. And our approach based on the instruments, which was explained at the beginning of the presentation, leads to elaborate a typology of these instruments, of this approach at the European level to understand this European action. The first is a concrete approach that could be described as tangible. So it involves the funding of projects. So we talked about the structural and investment funds, so it's mainly to these funds. And you have here two examples. First, in Warsaw, the parking lot Park and Ride, which was an integrated territorial investment. You probably know them, to connect municipalities, other municipalities to Warsaw. We will talk about it later also. And the project Kosmosviertel in Berlin, which was a social project to encourage integration and the neighborhood life in Berlin. And this project is part of a wider social program implemented by the City Council in Berlin, which shows also that and again, in this federal state, the European Union is fully integrated in the local policies. And in addition to this tangible vision of urban development, there is also an intangible approach. And this is for the exchange of experience and good practices between European cities. So URBAX is the key program in this sense. The aim in this dimension is not to act directly on the territory, but to change the way people think about them. So this typology helps us to understand EU public action and its impact on urban area. More concretely, if we take the example of the ITI as a European instrument used in urban area, it involves actors with more or less institutionalized competences, including at least the Commission, and local actors who implement a territorial strategy. So these stakeholders represent and act at different levels, which will be linked together through the implementation of this instrument. The territorial strategy will raise the question of how to modify the landscape and territoriality through co-constructed projects. And in Warsaw, the Metropolitan Association, which had no formal statutes, must elaborate a joint strategy between the different municipalities of the metropolis in order to implement and to receive the funds for this instrument. The Park and Ride project is a key example because it shows that, it provides a concrete way of connecting territories in an increasingly active urban functional area. So it's no longer just an integrated approach between the actors, such as in the example of Paris, the Oasis courtyard, but it's also an example of an integrated approach between the territories themselves. So it shows that the European Commission can influence the development of territoriality at the local level. This process of reconfiguring territoriality through the transformation of urban governance and the introduction of a multi-level governance needs to be put in perspective in the light of contradictions internal to cohesion policy, which are both ideological and practical. And today we will look at a practical example. So we saw that a multi-level governance was established, but is this multi-level governance really effective? I mentioned the typology of instruments for the urban dimension of cohesion policy, distinguishing between the tangible and the intangible parts. And these different approaches to urban development adopted by the European Commission, are part of a process of experimentation to overcome the lack of competence of the Commission in this field. The European institutions are making the notion of experimentation the key notion of the urban dimension of cohesion policy, and it leads to make it a laboratory for public action in this field. Innovation is one of the key terms in European urban dimension, and this injunction is part of a European discourse. this discourse wants to influence, I mean, the European Commission through this discourse wants to influence the behavior of those involved in urban development, even though the Commission has no power in this area. The projects become, the European project, the projects that are co-financed by the European Union become experiments, and the results of these experiments are intangible knowledge to be shared with other European players. According to URBACT, the implementation of an innovative project should lead to the creation of a good practice defined by the program as a practice that has proved its worth in guaranteeing the desired results and that could be recommended as a model. It is a successful experiment that has been tested and validated and deserves to be shared so that more towns can adopt it. So bridges are now being built between the tangible and the intangible parts. And we have here, we have an example in URBACT. In the URBACT program, in the last programming period, URBACT created a new type of networks, transfer networks. So they took the experiments, the European experiments done in the Urban Innovative Action Program, and they tried to transfer it to other cities. In the European logic of territorialized public action, this leads the EU to become involved in urban development by adapting to the needs on the ground. Because experimentation involves a risk. When we implement an innovative project, an innovation, we cannot guarantee its success. So the European Commission accepts to take this risk and to finance innovative projects. And experimenting in urban laboratories allows the EU to act at a local level without having the formal competence to do so. And in doing so, it is using a discourse to give itself the means to achieve its ambitions. But this idea of experimentation contains a practical contradiction, as I evoked in the introduction of this part. So two of the EU's key concepts of this experimental approach are exemplarity through good practices and the exchange of experience, and innovation through experimentation of projects. But the two concepts seem to be mutually exclusive, because innovation, in fact, prevents reproduction and excludes the creation of examples to follow, of models. And nowhere in European texts, European regulations, this contradiction is resolved. We don't see in the European official text how to combine these two, these two notions. This vagueness is in line with the need for cohesion, because to ensure that all the member states achieve the cohesion objective, the European institutions rely on vague but common notions. Experimentation, innovation, and other key terms in European discourse are defined according to the lowest common denominator. It is a compromise between the EU member states and the European Commission, which results in their instrumentalization either to accommodate internal contradictions or to serve sometimes competing interests. Here, governance and territoriality interact again. As we have said, sovereignty in urban areas is not shared. So multi-level governance creates a new European territoriality alongside those which already exist. It is a new lever for action for European territories and institutions. The transformation of governance and territoriality should therefore be put into perspective. This process also seems to be used by the different players to serve their own interests. To return to the quote of the introduction, these stakeholders are not playing together, but they are not playing against each other either. And this is clearly demonstrated by the comparison of the three cities. During my interviews with the different stakeholders at different levels of governance, I asked them the same question, which is, how would you define innovation? Because innovation was a word that was coming a lot in the answers, because the European project must be innovative, they must be sustainable, etc. So I wanted to know their definition of innovation, and no one has the same definition. For example, in Berlin at the district level, someone told me, all the programs require sustainability and innovation in the description of the project and in its implementation. It is not always so easy, of course, because a lot of things are already there to always explain exactly what it is, the innovative approach. But progress is being made. So sustainability and innovation are always conditioned for projects to be feasible and to add value to the city. So here we see that he has no definition, but innovation is a condition to access the funds. In Paris, and you have this quote, so I could interview the project manager of the Oasis courtyards that we saw before, and she told me where I felt it most was in different areas. Firstly, the fact that we were on a one-shot basis, and that was very useful, quite simply, but also in terms of negotiating points and having the legitimacy to say, it's an experiment, so we're going further in what we're proposing. We're giving ourselves the means to do something that will really break with what we've done before, precisely because we're in this framework. And it was sometimes very useful to be able to say, but Europe is waiting for us. I have to precise that the Oasis project was already going on before the European funding. So we see here that the European Union and the innovative discourse was instrumentalized at the local level to have some resources and to go further. And in Warsaw, it's again different because I could meet with someone at a national contact point for a European program, and he told me that innovation was something cheap and new. So not necessarily going as far as in Paris, for example. Moreover, in other cities, the first results of the interview show that for most of the project, the links between the European institutions and the links with the European institutions during the implementation of the projects were very low. So it leaves more room for the local level to interpret it and to instrumentalize the European discourse at the local level. And this questions the process of redefinition of the governance of city and the territoriality, because we see that maybe the local level just sees the opportunities to implement projects, but they don't really modify, they don't really transform the way of doing things. So specializing the urban dimension of cohesion policy should make it possible to put this process of implementation of a multi-level governance into perspective by evaluating the trade-offs made by urban players at different levels of governance with regard to these contradictions inherent in the urban dimension cohesion policy. And to conclude, using a geographical approach to a European policy, the aim is to re-examine concepts traditionally studied through the lens of political science in order to reveal some aspects of this paradoxical urban policy. The comparison needs to be developed further in the thesis with the fieldwork, but we can already see its benefits by giving us an overview of European opportunities in the field of urban development. We can produce a typology of European instruments and assess their effects on the governance and the territory. And we have some examples. So Berlin provides us with information on the implementation of this urban dimension from the perspective of a federal state. Warsaw on the effects of the integrated approach on territorial development, and Paris puts these effects into perspective. This has to be deepened in the next steps of the research, but we can conclude at this point that the European institutions, by overcoming their lack of competence in the urban field, influence the governance of cities and the development of these areas, but in a relative way. Our geographical approach, by specializing in European policy, enables us to re-examine multi-level governance to see, as quoted in the introduction, that the stakeholders are neither playing together nor against each other either. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation and examples of other policies and very clear presentation of what's in your mind. I open the floor for discussion. Please, let's have some questions. We'll also check online whether some questions emerged from our audience online.
I would like to ask about the role of the national and regional stakeholders
Of national.
national and regional institutions in their involvement in the creating of the European urban policy by, for example, defining the amounts and the directions that are financed under the European funds. Poland and in other countries also. You have mentioned the Mercantile project in Warsaw that was financed under the regional operational program for Mazowieckie Voivodeship. And as I'm aware, this program is prepared by the regional institutions in Poland, yes, at the Voivodeship level. It is accepted by the national institutions, and of course by the Commission. So it's not only the city and the commission that is making a decision about what to finance and where, right? There are other stakeholders at the national and regional level. And are you able to compare how it works in Poland, France, and Germany? What's the difference?
There's a question online. It is our student.
Yeah,
No? Kasia Romańczyk, sorry. I can see the full name, so that's right. Kasia Romańczyk, our colleague. Kasiu, zadasz pytanie?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Chloé, thank you for the presentation. It looks like multi-level governance is crucial to accelerating urban transformations in Europe. And I think that this starts from a widely accepted belief that different problems require political units of different size. However, to some critics, this approach may also provide some traps, as it comes up with alternative framework of development, which quite often invites international actors or market forces to decide about urban matters through different financial incentives. And for instance, in Poland, at the national level, the awareness of the need of multi-level governance does not translate into effective legal or spatial planning of urban areas. And since spatial policies are weak in Poland, market forces have become the main factor in shaping spatial structures of our cities. And having this in mind, my question is, what major traps and challenges have been recognized in your comparative analysis of urban governance in Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw? I assume that these traps and challenges must be different as far as different are political system in Poland, Germany, and France. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Agnieszka Herman?
Yeah, thank you, Chloé, for the presentation. Although it's not really my topic, I would like to ask you, or maybe provide more information about your empirical study. So what was really about the interviews, with whom you talked, and yes, what are your difficulties in this, yes, in your experience in talking with the stakeholders. So from this practical point of view of running interviews. And I have another question. And in fact, these are 3 questions, and they tackle also the problem of some points in which you were quite optimistic. And I do not really share this optimistic view. The first one is a participatory approach, which, of course, it's highly needed in this kind of projects, which involve different stakeholders on different levels and also citizens and so on and so forth. Can you elaborate more on the disadvantages of this kind of difficulties and challenges related to this approach? And second point is about transferring experience from different projects in different settings.
this is really challenging, and we also many years ago took part in a project, Interact project, which was about transferring knowledge on the instruments related to operating of industry parks or innovative parks or technological parks. So it was really a challenge to transfer experience from one side or one location to another. So do you know any examples from your I don't know, from your interviews from your cities? And the third element relates to approach of European Union to finance innovative projects. I mostly deal with innovative projects in enterprises, and it is a normal way of operating of European Union and European funds that the European Union expects effects, the effects of the projects. Maybe it is different in this kind of projects as Oasis one you mentioned. But yes, the critique is that there is a little place for, in fact, innovation, experimentation, and not delivering the output and the effects of the projects. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is the critique of the European Union approach. Maybe it is not true in case of your projects. Please, could you please reflect on that?
Thank you very much. Przepraszam, odbieram ci głos. Student is always first.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. And I have one question. How to deal with the resentment towards European Union, which we can see in Poland and in other countries too, and how to avoid such challenges when you want to implement these changes and make sure that all cities can be developed and in a similar way, and no matter the challenges that maybe some local actors can have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your turn.
Also, thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. And my question is about your question, your research question. It's the one that goes to what extent urban dimension of EU policy lead to the redefinition of governance methods within European cities. I understand you provided some examples, but they were from the context of EU policies, mostly cohesion policy. So my question is whether in this study or other studies you observe an impact of cohesion policy or this wider urban dimension of EU policies on the empowerment of metropolitan urban actors that goes beyond cohesion policy and therefore would be more sustainable. Because we've conducted some studies in Poland already on the areas covered with the territorial investment tool, and the results are mixed. What we observe in general is that cooperation was enhanced in areas where there already was some cooperation, and where it was initiated by this tool, it will probably disappear after European funding is done. And I also believe that there was a difference between areas where you have one clearly defined leader because the functional area is organized around some large city, but not all of them are like this. Like that, we have examples of functional areas that covers several comparable cities, and completely new actors were established. Probably they won't be so sustainable. For example, it's not the same level, but we have this example of Czech Republic, where at the now school level, the regional boards were established to implement operational programs, and it didn't work at all. It just disappeared with the financial perspective. This was a long question. I have another one, a short one. You mentioned that we had this topic of how national settings impact the way the solutions are implemented. And you said that in Berlin, there was a person at each level, at the district level, and in Warsaw, it depends. I didn't actually understand what it depends on and who did you mean in Poland.
Okay.
Okay, and one, maybe that's not a question, it's a comment. Your analytical approach is clearly influenced by the concept of multi-level governance, which is so much EU concept, and you can't actually find it in debate somewhere else in the States or other cities. I was wondering if this is actually have you considered other theoretical frameworks, for example, public governance, which is just broader and more general, and it also covers the concept of multi-level governance. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have other questions. If not, then I will have one last question. As you could see, we are a bit disbelievers here. I don't know if it's just here or general in Poland, but there is a conviction that EU cannot really affect institutions, that it affects the way we are behaving, but it's really rent seeking. So we are trying to get money and not really reforming the institutions. There's a saying in Poland that it's all about squeezing the Brussels sprout. So getting most money that we can from Brussels, how to do it, we can pretend anything, like being smart city or dumb city, whatever. So did you have any reflection on this when doing your research, and could you see the differences maybe between the cities and how deeply institutionalized are the changes that are initiated or intended by the EU? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, so maybe to start with the methodological questions, so the empirical work, and also the challenges and the traps of these methods. But the empirical work, I did a field research in the three cities, so Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw. I've done it in Berlin already. I'm finishing it in Warsaw, and I started in Paris, but it has to be continued, and also at the European level in Brussels. My goal is to conduct interviews with different stakeholders of the European urban dimension at different levels of governance. So from the European level to the local one, but also with associations advocating for this urban dimension, with some project managers, etc., to have an overview of this multi-level governance and to compare also their discourse on this European urban dimension and see how it is implemented on the ground. And the differences, for example, when I gave you the definition of innovation in the three cities, to compare this discourse and compare the differences between the cities and between the levels of governance. So this is the goal of this empirical work. That's the main activity. My main activity in this empirical work. The challenges and traps in the methods. Well, actually, doing these interviews are quite difficult because I did, I think, 35 or 36 interviews, and in the end I should have 50 interviews. And it's really difficult to have an overview of all the different actors involved in this multi-level governance, because, as I said, all of them are not all of them are institutionalized, not all of them feel concerned about it. So it's really hard to have this overview, and some of them are involved in this multi-level governance, but they don't feel involved. And I have an example, yesterday I had a meeting at the regional level in Warsaw. The regional level is really important. I will talk about it to answer your question, but the regional level is really important in the programming, in the implementation of the funds. But actually, the interview was quite difficult because they didn't feel involved at all. It means that they couldn't answer my question about, who were you? Who are their partners, their interlocutors? So that's one of the main challenge of this methodology. It's to really have this overview and to understand the interplay between the scales, because to understand this interplay between the scales, I need to talk with these actors, with these stakeholders. So yeah, and that's also one of the traps, because, well, if I can't meet with all of them, and if I can't access all this the stakeholders, this discourse, it's really difficult to give a proper overview of what is happening in this field. So that's quite difficult. Yeah. So that was about the methodology. Maybe about the national and regional institutions, their role in the urban dimension. They are central. So yeah, in this presentation, I focused more about the relation between the European Commission and the local level, to understand how the European Commission could approach directly the local level. But the national and regional levels are central. The national one, actually, they can't. The urban dimension can't exist without the national institutions, because, as I said, the urban competence is not shared. It's a competence of the states. So if they don't agree on the programs, if they don't agree on the funds regulations, if they don't agree on the implementation of an urban dimension, it does not exist. So of course, they give their approval for this urban dimension, but actually it does not. Even though they give their approval, there are still tensions about it, because they have an interest in letting the European Union finance this territorial development, but still they want to show that they are the one controlling the urban dimension. So it is central, but it does not prevent tensions. And the regional level is also central, because usually, this urban dimension is taking place in cohesion policy, which is also called regional policy. And so the regions are the main actors to implement the funds. They are the one, it's at this level that they select the projects. So of course, there is this role, but I was quite surprised during my interviews, because the regions don't feel involved at all. If I compare the three cities, I had no answers for now from the region in Paris. I couldn't meet them. They didn't answer my request. In Warsaw, they did not feel involved at all. Really, the interview was really short, but I had a lot of questions, and it was really surprising for me. And in the only exception is Berlin, because Berlin has the land status. So Berlin is a city, but also the region. So it's really easier for them, because they receive the funds for Berlin and they implement it in Berlin. So the system is really easier. And for the ITI, and maybe this is linked with this. Well, I will answer that after. But you said something about the ITIs. Yeah. We met. We met. Yeah. No, okay. No, okay. So I forget. Sorry. And the impact on maybe this on the impact on urban dimension of the impact urban dimension on the metropolis, and that go beyond cohesion policy. Actually, I don't think that. I don't really think that this urban dimension has a real impact on metropolization, and it's linked to the institutionalization the programs of this urban dimension locally. I think that yes, there are tools, and at the local level, we need some resources to develop the territory. So we will seize these opportunities and we will use it, and we will, well, yes, there are some requirements, so we will try to meet the requirements to access these funds. But actually, I don't feel that it's institutionalized, and we see it with the metropolization, because actually there is no, for example, in Warsaw, there is no legal status for the metropolis in Warsaw. In Berlin, neither. They tried to do it 20 years ago and it failed, and they don't want to do it again. So even though the European Union tries to encourage this development, I don't think it will work. And in Paris, actually, the ITIs are used, but they are used in small parts of the regions, and actually just to implement some project. And there is this Grand Paris, but the European Union has no impact on this metropolization. So I don't feel that it's institutionalized, and yeah, I don't see. I don't think that this impact goes beyond cohesion policy. So yeah, and that's what I said with this instrumentalization at the end. There is an instrumentalization of the European discourse from the local level to access these resources. So yeah, I see it like this. Yes. About the participatory approach, so the disadvantages. Actually, I didn't really study the effects of the participatory approach. What was interesting for me in this case with the Oasis courtyards, it was that really it was an illustration of public action and how we try at the local level to integrate all the stakeholders in the project. But actually, yeah, there were some difficulties in this project with this participatory approach. For example, these courtyards are open anytime. I mean, the weekend, for example, there is no pupils in the school, and the courtyard is open. And the school parents didn't want to do it at all for security reasons. And I was in a meeting, a public meeting about this project, and with the mayor of the district. And one parent asked, "Okay, I don't want to do it. Why do you want to open the courtyards? There is no interest, and there will be security problems." And he said, "Well, we don't want to do it. We don't want to do it, but the European Union wants to do it, so we have to do it to access the funds." And well, that was not true. That was not true, and that shows that the participatory approach can also have disadvantages, because, well, you have to combine competing interests. You have to combine competing wills, and that's a bit complicated. So yeah, there are difficulties, but it illustrates the public action implemented by the EU. About the transfer of experiences, actually, yes, I'm a bit optimistic about it, because I did also an internship at Urbact, and I worked quite a lot with this program, and I had some interviews with stakeholders in network. I had interviews with national Urbact contact points, etc. And I had really many positive experiences about it. Here in Warsaw, sorry for the pronunciation, but in Targówek, they implemented an Urbact network. They did a festival to promote the built heritage in the district, and it was very successful. And they kept some of the events, some of the documents they created for this festival, and this festival was based on the experience of Budapest, I think. And for example, it had positive effects still today, and yeah, I think it can work. And when I was during my interview, one of the common questions to all the stakeholders, it's also what is the EU added value for you in the urban development? And of course, the first one is financial. That's why also there is this instrumentalization and not really an institutionalization of these programs. But the second one is the exchange of experience, because we want to learn about the experience of other cities. That's the second one that is said. And I think, well, actually that, I mean, I feel during the interview that maybe Paris has more in common with Berlin or Warsaw than with a small French city, for example. So, and it's at the European level that we can create this platform of exchanges. And actually it's at the European level that it works for now. So yeah, I think I had some positive experiences about that. The question about innovation and the effects of innovation, sorry, I don't remember.
I mean that in fact there is no place for experimentation and failure. So you need to deliver some effects and have some outcomes of the project. In case of enterprises, so this is a huge critique of European policy towards innovative enterprises. And I don't know whether you came across the same problem in case of your projects.
Yeah, that is why how can I say that? That's why actually there are contradictions in the European urban policies, and that's also why I said it was a discourse of experimentation. Because it is everywhere, experimentation, innovation. I counted, I don't have the numbers with me, but on the European documents, I counted the number of innovative approach, innovation, these terms, how much we find it, and that's really impressive. It's everywhere. But it's a discourse because you have these requirements. You have these requirements, and in order to access the fund, you have to meet the requirements, but you still have to be innovative. So that's another contradiction. I didn't talk about it, but I talked about the exemplarity innovation, but that's another contradiction. So that's also a contradiction with the place-based approach, because yes, you have the place-based approach, but you have to meet this requirement. So maybe it's not place-based anymore. So yeah, I agree. There is little place for failure, but there is this discourse of around innovation, experimentation. And this is why it is instrumentalized at the local level also. And that is why I have this conclusion. Well, there is this multi-level governance. That's a fact. European Commission is now a new stakeholder. It was not the fact a few years back. But is this multi-level governance really redefining the profound nature of urban governance? I don't think so, and that's why I have this quote. They are not playing against each other, but they are not working together neither. I mean, it's a balance of powers, and yeah, there is this instrumentalization. And about maybe multi-level governance, I didn't, another framework of multi-level governance is really a notion that is used by the European actors. That is almost a political concept, actually, because they try to promote it. But that's also, that's political, because the European Commission is promoting the term multi-level governance, because the European Commission wants to be involved in this multi-level governance and promoting this notion, this development. Yes, of course, it will help this commission to be involved in it. But that's why I want to re-examine it through the lens of political geography, to understand well this process and the extent to which it is really a redefinition of the governance. After that, no, I didn't have maybe another framework. Maybe do you have an example of another framework then?
I mentioned new public governance, but new public governance.
New public governance, yeah.
Just something often mentioned when we discuss multi-level governance. That's why I chose this one. But there are so many other frameworks.
I have this. I have this new public governance, and also I talked about Neil Brenner's and this rescaling theory. And this, I didn't mention these debates, but also this neoliberal city. This evolution to a neoliberal city, because this multi-level governance is a new word for this implementation of a neoliberal city. And this is a debate I want to deepen in my research. And actually, yes, of course, for example, this multi-level governance is implemented in economic strategies. This urban dimension is implemented in an economic strategy. Even the Green Deal, because that's a sustainable urban development at the European level, but even the Green Deal is described as an economic, a growth strategy. So you have also this framework, this economic framework that is really important. And yeah, this is included in my research, but I didn't mention it really in the presentation. And even the process of metropolization, for example, if we take this framework of new public management or on this rescaling theory, of course, metropolization is encouraged also for reasons of competitiveness. Multi-level governance is also a way to encourage this new public management. Yeah. About the Euroscepticism and the resentment that is really present in Poland. Of course, this is part of the interplay between the different scales, between the different stakeholders. And actually, I think that it is also a political will at the European level to develop these urban policies to address directly to the cities, because there were some studies. Cities are less Eurosceptic than rural areas or peripheral areas, and it's the case in Warsaw, for example. And you have will European engagement, involvement in European policies in Warsaw, comparing to the national level. And I think that's also a way to bypass the reluctances for the European Union, to bypass the Euroscepticism at the national level and to address directly to the cities. It's also, I think, a political tool, and that participates to the different tensions, to the different, to the interplay of scales between the different stakeholders here. I think I answered all the questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the whole semester. It was a very good experience to have you here. We hope to come back someday as a presenter or as a part of audience. As you can see, we probably will keep this multimodal with an online seminar also. So you are invited to join online if you are not present in Warsaw, and good luck with your thesis.
Thank you for your welcoming, your attention. So that was really nice to discuss with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.